17. A bit rich. Without a doubt, we live in a grossly unequal society. Numerous people, through no fault of their own, scrape by on low wages or no wages at all, and, if the latter, are at the whimsical mercies of state benefits. The poor have pretty dreadful living conditions and unhealthy lives, with little scope to improve themselves. Their children typically find themselves following suit. Okay, some of these poor are, I guess, scroungers and not really poor at all, but that does not mean we should ignore the many who are genuine. Society should be far more egalitarian. There should be far greater equality between people's standards of living and access to health and education, and far greater equality of opportunity. And then there's global poverty. Polly, politician, is in full flow, interviewed in a pub near the Houses of Parliament. On her way out, she drops a pound coin into a beggar's hat and is then whisked off, in her chauffeur-driven Rolls, to her mansion in Hampstead. She needs to pick up her children, just returned from a well-known public school, before they all fly off to her yacht, moored near Saint-Tropez. While on holiday, her children receive additional tuition. Polly wants them to do exceptionally well in their school examinations. Polly, more accurately, Lady Titian, is an extreme case of wealth commenting on poverty, but she is no different in kind from many politicians who argue that private schools should be abolished, yet send their children to private schools, from religious leaders who preach sermons, wringing their hands over the world's dispossessed, yet their preaching takes place in fine churches bedecked with great works of art, and no different from world leaders, corporate, political, even celebrity, discussing global starvation at banquets with fine food and wine being served. She may, indeed, be no different from the many of us who agree that there are unjust inequalities and yet do little, so little. We may explain Polly's position simply as hypocrisy. She knows what she ought to do, give away much, much more money, but she is selfish. Perhaps she is not weak-willed but ill-willed, even by her own lights. Let us not be satisfied with that response. Let us grant her some sincerity. Can you sincerely want a more equal society while knowingly being wealthy? Champagne socialist is the term that readily comes to mind, but many non-socialist politicians are also committed to greater equality. It is plausible to believe that some Polly, for instance, are sincere. She recognizes some obligation to help others. She makes small charitable donations and canvasses for electoral candidates who are for greater equality. She could, however, give much more, without dropping her standard of living at all. And she could give much, much, much more and still live comfortably, though without the chauffeur-driven Rolls, the yacht and private education for her children. Excuses for her behavior are available. She may confess to being unable to part with money, even though she knows that she should. Alternatively, we may see her as irrational, engaged in self-deception over what she truly believes, but we are interested in whether she can be justified in declining to help more, despite her attachment to greater equality. In view of the small help that she does provide, she clearly is not a person who insists, "It's nothing to do with me." Can her stance be justified? Whatever she gave, she would make little overall difference. Society would still be radically divided between rich and poor. That thought does not carry weight. She makes small charitable donations, so why not bigger? It is true that if she is solely concerned about the relative poverty of the poor compared to the rich, then her donations, however large, would make little difference, but it is not true that they would make no radical difference to the welfare of some poor people. Improving the lot of the poor is typically the reason for seeking greater equality, and Polly could achieve this for some, were she to give much more. Maybe she believes that she has no obligation to help to put right injustices, such as inequalities, that are no fault of her own, but it looks as if she feels she does have some sort of obligation in these matters. For example, she feels she ought to promote a more egalitarian society. Witness her electoral work. It looks as if Polly is closing her eyes to what more she should be doing. How Polly views her wealthy position is relevant. We are assuming that she acquired her wealth legally, but she may, nonetheless, agree that she is not entitled to so much wealth, given the many poor around her. Perhaps she was lucky on the stock market or inherited her wealth. It is curious that many people who praise equality of opportunity and the importance of reaping benefits solely on the basis of merit also strongly condemn the taxation of inheritances, as if what people inherit should be fenced off from all questions of desert, merit and equality of opportunity. Inheritances are typically as much something for nothing as state benefits. Mind you, if we think of parents and their children as a composite entity, rather than separate individuals, then taxing inheritances could be seen as akin to taxing a transfer of money from the left pocket to the right. There are, though, good reasons not to think of parents and children thus. Perhaps Polly's wealth derived from her entrepreneurial skills and business ventures. Even so, no doubt, she could have helped her employees much more than she did, and, indeed, her business success occurred within the existing unjust society from which, doubtless, her business benefited. She was also lucky in possessing her business skills. There is a difference between thinking that a more egalitarian society should come about and thinking that you should help to bring it about personally. Were taxation increased and distribution of benefits changed, so that Polly's wealth was radically reduced, she may find that to be no problem at all. She would know that other wealthy people would be treated similarly. If, however, she were to reduce her wealth by her own charitable means, she would risk placing herself at a disadvantage compared to the wealthy who do not do likewise. She also would have the burden of deciding voluntarily to effect the reduction and, indeed, the burden of deciding which particular poor individuals to help, and can that be done without being unfair? Further, she may claim that, with her current wealth, she is able to influence government ministers and is, in fact, encouraging them to improve their policies on poverty. She would, no doubt, hasten to add that her aristocratic title no way results from the influence of her riches. The strength of these claims is moot. Whether they are sufficiently strong to justify her lack of significant donations to the impoverished and dispossessed is highly doubtful. Polly may insist that charitable help makes the poor dependent on charity, and it would be better to be in a society where people received decent wages. Surely, though, having an improved standard of living through charity is better than no charity and no improved standard of living. Some deploy the mantra, wealth trickles down, vast inequalities ultimately benefit the poor. Evidence for that mantra is very weak, and let us remember, even if the mantra is true, it is no get out card, excusing the wealthy from helping the poor far more, be it through charitable donations, accepting higher taxation or, at the very least, not engaging in every trick possible to secure tax avoidance. Can we square Lady Titian's wealth with her commitment to equality? Are not the attempted justifications for the concerned rich hanging on to their money all, dare we say, a bit rich? Should men receive preferential treatment to equalize female-male average lifespans? The call for sexual equality is probably for an equal concern for both males and females and their roles in society. That equal concern is often restricted to some sort of equality in opportunities rather than outcome, yet they are sometimes entangled. Typically, there is no good reason to promote the lives of one sex over the other, though occasionally there is. In a declining population, encouraging women to bear children may be a high priority, suggesting more resources for females than males. If couples are reluctant to have children, then there may be good reason to provide incentives for childbearing. These are not thereby examples of equal concern for both women and men. They would justify inequalities in treatment on the basis of a value such as society's continuance or requiring sufficient people of working age to support others. Also, they would not necessarily benefit women. They may be pressurizing some women who would prefer childless lives. In some countries, we witness opposite pressures, with childbearing being restricted. A simple point here is that sexual equality, quite whatever it is, does not always merit highest priority. Further, equal concern for lives faring well does not mean that lives should fare well equally, in the same way. Some men want children, some do not. Some women do, some do not. We still have not, then, discovered the heart of the sexual equality demand, if intended to be more than a vaguely expressed equal concern for lives, regardless of gender. Sometimes the equality demand is linked to proportions. Things are wrong when the female-male ratio in the same occupation or college course radically differs from 50-50. Many feminist-minded women rail at societies where more women than men typically stay at home, raising children, without paid careers. Yet why ever assume that numerical equality is how things should be? Perhaps there is something in the biology that accounts for such differences, and perhaps there is nothing wrong in that. Perhaps there is nothing wrong, but there could be something wrong. The numerical differences may result, not from biology, but from unfairness or coercion. Unfairness first. Whatever the exact biological differences, there is no obvious good reason why, for example, one sex should have the vote but not the other. Whether there should be numerical equality between the sexes in parliaments, congresses and senates is, though, a different matter. If representative bodies ought to reflect citizens represented, should we not ensure the right parliamentary proportions of philosophers, homosexuals, ballet lovers, even criminals, and, indeed, regardless of people's votes? The call for equality between the sexes among representatives suggests that women and men, as groups, possess some significantly different concerns. Paradoxically, this particular call for sexual equality is probably justified by some important sexual inequalities not needing eradication. Returning to employment, if women are rejected for jobs simply because they are women, then that is usually unfair. By contrast, it is not unfair if, for example, the drama requires male actors. It is not unfair to men if beauty salons prefer employing women, conscious of clients preferring the female touch or, at least, its image. Of course, if women and men do the same work, then they deserve equal pay. If society, though, has customs, even legislation, whereby it is far more likely that women, rather than men, will disrupt their employed careers for child rearing, then it is not obviously unfair for employers to prefer equally good candidates lacking such future disruption dangers. Or is it? Such discriminatory practices may be unfair if women are forced or customarily expected to have children. Coercion is touched on below. The practices may be unfair if it is simply assumed that, because they are women, the individuals concerned are bound therefore to want children and disrupt their careers. They may not, and perhaps this could be established. At least on the surface, though, many women and men, without coercion, simply want to have children. Further, as a matter of biology, women will, therefore, usually have more time away from work than men, which, but for special provision, is likely to affect the women's careers. So, it would seem, many are arguing that fairness in such cases requires that special allowances be made for women in such circumstances. Once we enter the arena of justifying allowances, an arena we are bound to enter, it is pretty difficult to find firm groundings. Here is a silly example. Some people may really want to be firefighters, yet seriously lack the appropriate stamina. Presumably no one truly believes that such individuals should be specially catered for, perhaps by providing special fitness training, drugs and reduced duties. Some people are more prone to illnesses than others, but here, in contrast to our response to would-be firefighters, we often do make special allowances. The puzzle here concerns which special allowances can be justified. Coercion alerts us to another important factor concerning sexual equality, and one that can lead to special compensatory allowances. A rhetorical reference is to the tame housewife. She has been brainwashed, tamed, into preferring to look after the family. It is not what she truly desires. Maybe she is akin to the slave who, brought up in slavery, knows of nothing better. In some societies, women clearly are not free to realize themselves, being denied proper education, subjected to veils, and much worse. In liberal societies, pressures and customs can still inhibit various free choices. Another puzzle is then, which inhibitions matter? After all, should we be distressed by male bank employees being banned from wearing dresses? More on exemptions occurs in the next chapter. When freedoms are present, if different outcomes persist, why should that lead us to think that something has gone wrong? Some argue that numerical differences between the sexes, more males are company directors, mathematicians, members of parliament, do show that the freedoms clearly were lacking. Inappropriate nurturing or cultural pressures must be the explanation, and so, special arrangements should be made for those who have suffered. But how is it known that such pressures must be the explanation of the differences? Yes, on many occasions, in some countries, on a vast number of occasions, we can spot the coercions, the pressures, but it is an unjustified and curious leap to conclude that when none can be spotted, they must still be lurking somewhere, if numerical differences are present. A curiosity is the seeming assumption that, were numerical differences to result from what is natural and biological, then they would be acceptable. It is as if it is believed that nurturing and cultures do not ultimately result from nature. Yet, from where else can they result? Further, why is the alleged nature-nurture distinction thought relevant in determining how things should be? We often rightly want to interfere with what is natural. These comments should not blind us to those millions of women, throughout the world, who are treated badly just because they are women. That horrendous fact should not blind us to another, namely, the millions of both women and men who are treated badly because of wars, religious intolerance, corrupt governments and uncaring others. Living dangerously. Here is Arthur Schopenhauer. Women are directly adapted to act as the nurses and educators of our early childhood, for the simple reason that they themselves are childish, foolish, and short-sighted. In a word, are big children all their lives. Consider how a young girl will toy day after day with a child, dance with it, and sing to it, and then consider what a man, with the very best intentions in the world, could do in her place. Unsurprisingly, Schopenhauer gets it in the neck from women. Quite what is the evidence he wants us to assess? And what is his reasoning? Rejecting Schopenhauer, though, should not lead us to insist, against all evidence, that typically there are no female-male differences in outlooks and emotions. Genuine free choices of women and men may well generate very different lifestyles and variable ratios between men and women in a variety of occupations, and, in some cases, free choices, it seems, do beget just such different lifestyles and ratio variations. Arguably, the ultimate ideal sort should be that of flourishing lives for all. The call for sexual equality has led to increased awareness of women's differing needs concerning flourishing lives. There is also increasing awareness more generally of the significance of parenthood for many. Parenthood is often promoted through maternity and paternity leave, and promoted in some countries not fearing, well, not obviously fearing, significant population decline. The question then arises whether the special provisions for parenting should take priority over, say, special provision for the childless, male or female. The childless, to flourish, may require careers undamaged by taking long breaks for travel, voluntary work, even champagne drinking. There are different ways of flourishing, and different groups, for various reasons, typically secure more opportunities and more flourishing than others. Societies muddle through, selecting some groups to promote over others, but which deserve that promotion. Which discriminations are fair? Which equalities are worth seeking, be they sexual, educational, or even by way of monetary income and outcome regarding quality of life? Most people accept that at least a reasonable lifespan is a central element in flourishing. Over this, in many countries, men are worse off than women, as, for that matter, are the poor compared with the wealthy. Improving the male lifespan would typically benefit both sexes. So, should resources be diverted to promote sexual equality in that regard? Perhaps the answer is yes. Perhaps, then, men need a lower retirement age than women, or extra health care or leisure hours. Should that be a high priority? Should that be up for discussion? The puzzling heart of sexual equality remains. Which sexual discriminations amount to sexism, to discriminating against one sex without good justification? Which sexual equalities should, and should not be promoted? After all, there just is a greater demand for female beauticians than male. Does that need to be changed?